Awakening by Solocitizen. Chapter 2. Never Been Here Before. Present Day.
Animus, where?
Lumina tried opening her eyes, but she was too tired, and within seconds she nodded off. A bump roused Lumina from her stupor. Her head rolled over to the side, the chair was comfy, and the hologram in front of her pretty, but she couldn't drift off again.
Stay awake,
she shouted inside her own mind. A green triangle sped towards a blue ball. Another bump, that one more of a jolt, and her mind drifted out of the haze a little more.
FTL jump, that's right. We made an FTL jump. That's why I'm so disoriented. Best just to sleep through these things whenever possible.
She looked at the hologram again and jumped into full alertness with an explosion of shock and terror.
Animus,
she shouted.
We popped out of FTL right next to a planet the size of Equus, and our orbit is rapidly decaying. Fire up the reactor and throw all engines into reverse.
No response. Her heart sank into a pit just beneath her stomach.
Animus, I need you!
Alert, collision detected.
The voice wasn't his. It sounded like him, but it lacked all the intelligence that backed up his words. Why, in the name of Celestia, that thing spoke in her friend's place, she didn't know.
Autonomous control unavailable. Manual helm control engaged.
Flashing lights sprang up around Lumina, along with a joystick from beneath the command chair and a throttle from the hoof rest to her left. She took the throttle in her left hoof and the joystick in her right. Lumina had a Class F license and more than qualified to fly a starship exceeding 2 million metric tons, but she was always assisted by a computer. An AI always backed her up. She didn't drive so much as command. She didn't know what to do. Her AI companion wasn't helping, and the haze from FTL space still filled her head. She panicked. The Luminas Dream bucked and reeled at the slightest touch of the joystick or throttle. Animus's cool logic wasn't there to intermediate between her and the ship, to smooth out her commands and adjust her maneuvers. Over the next 20 minutes, she lost the battle to stay afloat. Warning lights announced her defeat, and the planet below filled the window ahead of her. Massive sheets of ice blanketed the majority of the surface, broken up by jagged shards of land. It shined like the sun, reflecting the light and glowing without taking any of the warmth in for itself. A silver ring haloed the ice world, and a single moon shined from high above. Lumina's mother said that long ago, the three pony tribes struggled against each other without end, and their anger drew wendigos, spirits of hate that choked the land with snow and ice. If there were any merit to the story at all, then that planet must have been rage and sorrow incarnate. Short minutes passed, and the big white ball filled the windows. The Luminas Dream shuddered as red flames lapped at the window. She was entering the atmosphere. Great. The starship was never designed to enter an atmosphere. The best Lumina could do was open all the hatches, docking ports, and cargo holds, and throw the engines in reverse. It didn't help much. 2 of the remaining ramjets broke off their spokes and disintegrated high above the ice. Each time the ship bucked and kicked in agony. The engines pushed back against the planet and put Lumina in a brutal tug-of-war between the 2 competing forces. Her insides threatened to burst. The holograms around her reported bits of the ship peeling off and burning up in atmosphere. Flames cleared from the window enough to show ice flowing by beneath the ship. The Luminas Dream sped into a valley bordered on all sides by imposing mountains as hospitable as a dragon's mouth. Lumina gripped the hoof rests, tightened her harness, and grit her teeth together. Then the hull touched ice. Lumina was catapulted into her harness with enough force to knock the air out of her lungs in a single bleat. Metal convulsed and moaned, and the lights and holograms around her flashed red and died. A grinding feeling flowed up from the bowels of the ship and filled Lumina with a harsh vibration. Ice splashed across the window and obscured her view. She felt the ship turn. Sparks rained down on her. She never screamed. She never even let out more than a whimper. Lumina stared straight ahead in silence and waited for the ship to topple over and end her life. But the Luminas Dream never rolled over. Instead, the ship found its center, and Lumina lived. Over the course of countless minutes, the ship ground to a halt. When it was over, and Lumina's frantic breathing was the only sound on the bridge, she curled her shaking body together in a ball. She survived. Somehow, through it all, She survived. Damage reports and red system failure messages flooded in from all over the ship. She didn't want to look. She didn't want to hear about how she survived the crash just to freeze to death or run out of oxygen. After a few minutes, her shaking died down, and she rounded up enough courage to look at the damage report. It was bad. It was real bad. The engines were mostly trashed, the bottom 2 decks were non-existent, and the central AI core wasn't talking. The FTL drive and dark matter core reported fine, but once a ship the size of Luminas Dream touched down on a planet, there wasn't anything any pony could do to get it back in space. It was hopelessly massive. Well, at least she wouldn't freeze to death. The reactor kept pumping out power to heat the hallways and power the food synthesizers, and emergency bulkheads locked down the tears in the hull. The 2 lowest decks were smeared against the ice behind her, but nothing critical to her survival was lost. Lumina unfastened herself from the crash couch and fought her way past the fallen control panels and wires cluttering the bridge. Red emergency LEDs lit her path. The stairway leading out of the bridge lay strewn across the hallway below, nothing more than a 4-meter drop. But she didn't want to risk landing on broken metal, so she used some broken cables to fashion a makeshift rope to lower herself down. Progress was slow. Before she even began tackling a reactor inspection, a distress beacon, or the obligatory venture outside, her first priority was checking the AI core and trying to restore Animus. Something very wrong had happened down there. The hyperlift stopped halfway to the AI core, so Lumina popped open the emergency hatch and hiked to the core on hoof. The way was unlit save for sparse running lights. The insides of Luminas Dream creaked with each step of her hooves. The stench of superheated plastic plagued her nose, but she pressed on through the fumes and darkness. Prying open the doors to the AI core almost took more strength than a unicorn like her could muster. Lumina didn't have the strength of an earth pony, after all. However, she managed to get the doors open enough to wedge her body through. Her heart sank at the sight inside. Animus was dead. No better way to put it. A big black scorch mark spat out from what she assumed was his quantum processor, while a crater the size of a pony was all that remained of his hard drive. Lumina plopped down on her hind legs and wept into the grated floor beneath her. Her friend was gone. He was one of the few she ever had, and now he was gone. In that dark place, she found a light. It was nothing more than a faint yellow LED beneath the grated floor, but a light nonetheless. Lumina dug up a crowbar out from under a pile of scrap metal, picked it up with her mouth, and lifted the grating from the floor. She climbed down into the pit and checked the label next to the LED. Animus Auxiliary Systems.
Animus.
Lumina ran a hoof over the LED and smiled.
I was so worried, I thought I'd lost you. Please tell me what happened. How can I fix you?
Please restate your command.
The same vacant voice from earlier echoed throughout the chamber. Lumina followed the light to a collection of hard drives anchored into the floor. The computer wasn't connected to a quantum processor, and the hard drives themselves only stored about half as much memory as he needed to run properly. The only explanation she thought of was that Animus transferred himself into another system and was trying to run himself without the proper hardware. Only the most basic bits and pieces of Animus still functioned. Maybe if she had spent her life studying computer engineering, then she might know how to fix him. But she didn't.
I'm so sorry.
Lumina put her head against the computer, and tears rolled down the side of her cheek.
I don't know what to do.
At least, maybe, some part of her friend was still alive. That was enough. Lumina brushed the tears from her eyes and bottled up her feelings beneath her heart. She still had work to do.
Animus, is that you I'm talking to right now?
She crawled out of the hole and slid the floor grate back into place.
Please restate your command.
I'm going to have to be real specific with you, aren't I?
Please restate your command.
That wasn't it. What is the status of Animus's intelligence?
Please restate your command.
Lumina covered her face with a hoof, sighed, then trotted over to the burnt-out quantum processor.
Run diagnostics on the,
Lumina read the label on the processor before continuing.
Autonomous Network Intelligent Master Unit System.
Alert. Total system failure following non-standard FTL jump. All memory files and applications compressed and downloaded to auxiliary systems.
Any way to fix you?
Lumina asked.
Please restate your command.
You're not going to be much help, are you?
Affirmative.
Lumina sighed, again, then forced her way into the hyperlift tube and started to hike her way back to whatever was left of her room. She needed a good night's sleep. The rest she'd deal with tomorrow. Sleep didn't come to her easily that night, and neither did it last when she reached it. Nightmares of falling, monsters in the sky, and sightless horrors barraged her. She woke from her dreams covered in cold sweat and with a racing heart. Lumina was desperate for some rest. She knew about a tranquilizer in sickbay that would knock her out, but she didn't know if it would provide the reprieve from the nightmares. Lumina threw herself out of bed and kicked the wall with her hind legs. The anger in her subsided into sorrow, and she collapsed on the floor, crying into the moonlight.
I'm never going home.
Lumina wiped her running nose with her hoof and rolled over onto her back.
What's the point if I get up at all tomorrow? No pony's ever going to find me.
Rolling over onto her stomach to hide her face, she caught sight of her book, out of its box and sprawled open. It slid from under her bed during the crash, and its faded cover now bore dozens of nicks and scars, but it was otherwise intact. She pulled it close to her and curled her body around it.
What would a brave pony like Applejack do?
She whispered into the night. From someplace deep in her mind, an answer whispered back.
She wouldn't let this get the best of her, and neither should you. No matter how bad things get, you have the strength to pull through.
Lumina sniffed and picked herself up. Most of the furniture in her room slid to the far wall during the crash. Since she wasn't going to get much sleep anyway, she set to work picking everything up and pushing them back into place. When she was very little and very scared, Lumina's mother taught her a little trick for finding a peaceful place away from her fears. She sat in the middle of the room, on her hindquarters and with her back legs crossed together. She pushed her tail off to one side and rested her front hooves on her hind legs. There was a name for this position, but she didn't remember. After a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined light. In her mind's eye, a single beam of light shot down from way above her and lit her horn. From there, it expanded and poured down over her spine into every place in her body. She imagined it warm and clean. She held the image for a while and pulled the light outwards through the entire room. Lumina opened her eyes. A slight pressure on her horn broke her concentration. She didn't know where that sensation came from.
Oh no, did I break something in the crash?
She tapped at it with her hoof, but didn't feel any sharp pains or loose parts. Something to deal with in the morning. Lumina was tired now, and decided to try sleeping again. She yawned and wormed her way under the covers of her bed. There she was met with dreams of Twilight Sparkle and her 5 friends. They were there trying to tell her something, but she couldn't hear them over the noise of her own dreams. 47th of planting season, 10,044 AC.
But I don't want you to go!
Little Lumina stomped her hoof on the floor and shouted at her mother.
It's not fair!
Lumina's mother set her bags down next to the door. She turned to her daughter and sat down next to her.
I know it isn't fair, but I don't have much choice.
She put her hooves around her daughter and pulled her in for a hug.
Listen, I know this is hard, but this is the way it has to be. And I'll see you twice a month. I'm not leaving you, remember that. I'm not going to disappear on you. We're going to see each other soon. No, don't go!
Lumina sobbed into her mother's mane.
It's not fair! Hey, listen closely. I've got something to show you.
Lumina's mother rearranged herself in an awkward position on the floor.
This is something you can do whenever you're feeling upset. The way I'm sitting now is called the Lily Lotus position, and sitting this way is the first step in clearing your head.
Lumina picked up her Twilight Sparkle doll off her back and sat down the same way as her mother.
Next, you clear your mind and focus a big bright light shining down into you. Okay, then what? Then you picture it shining through you and lighting up all the dark places inside you up. You can do this anytime you're in a troubling place in life. And will it make everything better?
Lumina sniffed and picked up her Twilight Sparkle doll.
No, it won't, sweetie. said her mother, "but it will give you a little peace away from your troubles and help you face them when you're ready."
Hoofsteps pattered up from the nearby hallway. Lumina's mother glanced in their direction, rose to her hooves in a hurry, and slung her bags over her back.
"I have to go now, but I'll see you again on Saturday."
Lumina's mother leaned in and gave her one last kiss.
"I love you very much, sweetie." "I love you too, Mommy."
And with that, she was out the door. Her father stepped into the entranceway and stared at the door. Lumina held her doll close and didn't cry. She kept the emotions in and bottled them up next to her heart. "Come, Lumina. There is a lot we need to talk about." Lumina's father trotted off towards his office, and the little filly followed. The desk in her father's office was ginormous, and adorned with the model FTL ferry she was not allowed under any circumstances to touch. Her father lowered himself into his big chair and propped his hooves up in an arch. With a flick of his horn, he motioned for his daughter to take a seat on the opposite side of his work desk. The sharp edges of the desk, the odor of laser-scribed documents, and the ticking of the clock in the back provided her nothing but unease, so Lumina turned to her Twilight Sparkle for comfort and squeezed it tight. "I know how difficult this is for you," Lumina's father spoke after a long time. "My parents, your grandmother and grandfather, separated when I was very young, right about your age, in fact. It was hard, yes, but I like to think I'm stronger for having gone through it. Your mother and I, we had our differences, and we simply couldn't remain together. I'll tell you more about it when you're older, but the important thing is that we can get through this together, as a family."
"And Mommy?"
Lumina asked. Her father sighed and shook his head. Lumina couldn't help it. She broke down and cried, and cried, and cried. "Oh, sweetie." Her father trotted over to her and held her close. There, it's going to be all right."
"No, it's not."
She pushed away from him and bolted from her chair.
"You're a liar, and I hate you."
Lumina galloped out of her father's office and up to her room and slammed the door shut. With a scream, Lumina cast the Twilight Sparkle doll off her back. She kicked and stomped and yelled until the stuffing was as lumpy as her father's icky mashed potatoes.
"I trusted you."
Lumina wiped her eyes dry. She gave the doll one last kick, just for good measure. After a few minutes of staring into her floor, she got out her storybook, and with the help of her reading learner, she started reading at the beginning of the first story, and she didn't stop reading until she turned the last page. A vivid image of Twilight Sparkle and the elements of harmony stretched out over the fancy end page. They stood in a line, shoulder to shoulder, with Princess Luna and Princess Celestia rounding out the middle ground. The background itself was an illustration of a library, with massive stained windows running across the walls. It looked like someplace in Canterlot Palace, but Lumina had studied every image in the book and found nothing that quite matched it. At some point, Lumina fell asleep, with her book open to the image of the library.
"Lumina, wake up,"
the voice of a mare called to her.
"It is not time for you to sleep."
Though the words never rose above a gentle whisper, the raw authority behind the voice snapped Lumina awake in a heartbeat. She pulled her head out from between the pages in her book and glanced around for the source.
"Twilight Sparkle, is that you?"
she asked.
"No, I'm not Twilight Sparkle."
The voice chuckled ever so slightly.
"But she is over here if you'd like to see her."
Swirling mist ebbed and flowed out of the crack between her door and the floor, and with it came light, pure and jovial in its color. It called Lumina closer, and she ventured toward her door. Her hoof-falls fell in silence on the hardwood floor. She stood before her door, debating whether or not to take the final step and let it in. The light poked through the crevices in her doorframe as radiant pillars. The second Lumina put her front hooves on the doorknob and turned it open, the door flung out into a place straight out of a fairy tale. Bookshelves, filled end to end with every conceivable manner of written text, ran in rows further than her eyes could see. Walls reached up into the blue sky before fading away entirely. Music crept into Lumina's ears, and the smell of old books tickled her nose. She slammed the door shut. If the library was real, and not some dream, it'd still be there when she opened it again. Lumina grinned and giggled and threw the door open wide. That time, the light was gone, and the music had disappeared, and in its place were the khaki walls of her house. She didn't give up, and tried opening and closing the door for a long time. Calling out to the mayor on the other side didn't work either, and after a while, Lumina gave up. She hung her head and crawled into bed and went to sleep.